Okay, if our 3 volunteers could come up. So thanks in advance to Sergey, to Isha, and to Ash. They're going to help us get the talk started.
Yes.
They've already been prepared with what their task is. Could you do your task now, please? This is the first time they've done this task, so you're clear.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
High enough that it can be seen. Okay, Isha, you've got to separate the two so that we get, so that we got a bottom and a top.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, clearly we needed more practice on this. This is good.
So this is a little bit of a flex, right? But I mean, Mark and I go to a lot of conferences, and all of these conferences we pick up either the shirts of our employer, the projects that we're working on, all of the swag that you get in the vendor area, and this is just a subsection of all of the shirts that we have. And rather than a flex, we just wanted to do this to make a point. And I hope that, you know, the third day of the conference in the afternoon, that you will take this point and take it seriously when you get back to your teams and when you get back home and start cleaning out your closets.
Clutter is what the talk is about. What you're seeing is our cluttered closets. We're going to talk some more about cluttered closets. Thanks, you can have a seat now.
Yeah. All right. Just a little bit of background on us so that we can set the stage for how this happened and how we started working together. My background is software engineering. The last 5 years I did developer advocacy for JFrog. So tons of DevOps, lots of concern about security and artifact management and things like that. And one of the things that JFrog did, as a lot of companies do, is offer some resources to projects that need help with their infrastructure and just need a little boost. And this is where Mark comes in.
And the Jenkins project was one of the lucky beneficiaries of that. JFrog donated Artifactory to us. We use it, we're very happy with it, but we made some mistakes, and we're going to use some of those mistakes to talk about this story.
So how many of you need to clean out a closet? Yes, yeah, same here. Physical stuff is one thing, like we just demonstrated with all of our shirts, but we also have digital clutter. How about photos? Do you have photos everywhere on your machine? And yeah, I had to clean off my phone just before this conference because after, goodness, 5 years, I hadn't deleted a single photo on my phone.
But they're all equally valuable. They're all intensely valuable and a deeply emotional attachment. Right?
Yes. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the first problem, like real problem I had with the team with digital clutter. And this is back when I first started on my first DevOps team. We were a brand new team, very small, excellent place to learn because it wasn't, you know, super mission critical stuff, but we were deploying stuff into the cloud. We were working on Docker containers for the first time. We were working with dividing our monolithic application into microservices for the first time. Lots of stuff to learn, and guess who got put on our Jenkins box? Just to be clear, it was me, not Mark. If it was Mark, it might have turned out a lot better. But I set it up for the first time ever. I was new to the project, new to all of it, and very curious though, and I just went in head first. The very first thing I did is get it all set up, get everyone's permissions, get everyone involved in using it for our builds. And it lasted for about 5 days because I didn't do anything but the default settings. And the first thing that happened was every build that we ever did, every intermediate artifact, I didn't get rid of any of it. So all the builds filled up, the thing crashed, we couldn't get our builds to run anymore, I couldn't figure out why, and I'm like, oh, I didn't clean out our closet.
Right, so cleaning is a thing. All right, so it's a little more dramatic when your donor contacts you and says, you're using dramatically more cloud storage than we can afford. So they came to us in 2025 and said, you're using 10 terabytes of storage, and we're paying for 10 terabytes of storage. We simply cannot afford 10 terabytes of storage. That needs to change. And so the change process started. So let's see if...
So let's talk about real money here, like real numbers, what that actually means. I like to do the math. So 1 gigabyte of storage. Let's just use a company called any web service company has an average price of 0.023 cents per gigabyte of storage. And okay, now we're at a terabyte. Okay, that's about $23.50. That's reasonable, right? It's okay, we can tolerate that. But now we're at 10 terabytes of storage, and without any maintenance and any cleanup, this is just going to continue to grow and grow. So now you're at $235 a month. Still pretty reasonable. But then you look at your yearly cost, and now you're up to $2,800. So it's starting to get to be a concern.
Right, and it is a concern. So we've got to find a way. Now, we're delighted to say we put someone on it. They reduced our use of 10 terabytes to less than 2 without doing any harm to the project. You know what that says? That says we weren't administering the thing well enough, right? We were not paying attention. So the moral here is pay attention.
And we all know with our closets at home, if you let it get overwhelming, it's more and more difficult to sort through all of that stuff and figure out what exactly you actually need to keep and what you don't. I am aware, for a lot of projects that requirement for government regulations, you're required to keep certain things, maybe start considering keeping some of those things in a lower cost storage rather than just running around with the high price stuff. So storage is one thing, but there's lots of other resources that a project needs to be concerned with. And this was also on the same DevOps team where I had my Jenkins excitement and adventures. We were also working with Docker. I mentioned that. It was the first time that we were putting together Docker containers. And we were all learning, so it was great. Good, I had really good mentors, a really good place to learn. But one of the things that we did is we threw our application into a Docker container and threw it on a server and decided, hey, this is great. It's running well. We just let it run for a while to see what happened. And it's summertime. How many of you guys have filled up water balloons? Yeah, you got kids I did that once for my kids' baseball team. That was a blast. We hit water balloons with our baseball bats. That was fun. But you kind of get the idea when you first start is when you put that water balloon under the faucet, it grows and grows, and you kind of know how much you need to, before it bursts, you got to stop, right? And it might take a couple times because you might have some burst on you on accident. It's part of the adventure. That is also kind of how our containers worked out, because we didn't consider all of the stuff inside the container that was like logging stuff. And we weren't streaming those logs anywhere. They weren't going anywhere. They were just inside the container. So when we hit our maximum storage allotment for the container, it just quit running. And it took us a little bit to we figured that out pretty quickly, but finding all the little spots inside of our application that were leaking, that was a little more of a challenge. Some of it we didn't even realize. So pretty fun.
Okay. All right, and another resource. This time let's talk about bandwidth. When we got notified that, hey, you're using too much storage, let's see, this is our 2023 story, so 2 years ago. 2 years ago, we got the notice from JFrog, hey, you're using 50 terabytes a month of bandwidth. And that's got to change. That's got to change because that's incredibly expensive. And so we had to do a project to try to figure out what's going wrong. Where are we possibly using 50 terabytes of data? Who could be consuming this thing? Oh, oops, it's a public service. And it's got some very interesting things on it.
Anyone want to give shout out a number on what that price might be for 50 terabytes of data for data transfer? How about, is it more than the storage? The storage was what, 25?
Right, $2,000 a year for the storage. More or less than the storage?
More?
Oh, okay, so we have some people who are experienced. That's good.
Is it considerably more?
Yes, 30 times more.
All right.
We got it was $300,000.
Now we go. That's very good. We're getting there. That's the story to tell. And this is the terror, right? JFrog's donating, and we're using. Continue.
So let's look at the real numbers. As we all know, data transfer gets a little bit complicated when you're trying to measure it because it can make a difference, especially if you're with any web service company. It might be like within the zone or outside the zone, or data coming in or data going out. There's all kinds of differences. Plus, you may have plans where like a certain amount of data is cheap and then it gets more expensive. That kind of thing goes on. So we have a range here. We've got 2 cents, 17 cents for 1 gigabyte, up 1 terabyte. We're now looking at the high side of $174. But now we're at 50 terabytes. That's getting a little more expensive, $8,700. And what is that for a year? So planning for a project like this can get pretty expensive if
Yeah.
you're not watching it.
It's tough on a sponsor to pay $100,000 to sponsor an open source project, right? That for me was the bad story here, is putting one of the sponsors in a position where they're spending $100,000 to support this open source project is probably more than they should be doing. So let's talk about what it meant. So what did we do? Well, we asked for the logs. We got the access logs, and Basil Crow, sitting front and center here, wrote tooling to convert access logs to SQL data. And now we can ask SQL queries to figure out who's doing what. And now we are dismayed. Next slide. The dismay is this part. First, the most flagrant consumer was some machine sitting in China that was in a tight loop downloading every release of Jenkins, and as soon as it finished the downloading, it started again. And our attempts to contact the cloud provider, Alibaba, we notified their abuse line, we notified this thing. Please tell us who's running this thing. We got to make them stop. This is not helping them, it's not helping us. They seem to be using almost as much bandwidth as they could get between North America and China. It was that kind of consumption, 10 to 15 terabytes a month, one single consumer. We finally, in desperation, after the cloud provider didn't respond, after we couldn't figure out how to get this thing gone, we blocked the IP address. Now that is the worst possible way to handle it, right? All they have to do is change IP address and they're back creating the problem. IPs are not some magical thing, but it worked. That's all we cared about, it worked. Now the other embarrassment was, there was a major game company that was using 5 terabytes a month. And all we had to do was ask them, please stop. They shook their heads, said, oops, and stopped. Because they were downloading the same thing over and over again from the public internet. They could have just as easily downloaded it from their own machine. They did not have to access it. It was just a mistake. And the third one, yeah, I know, it's me. My basement was misconfigured. I was downloading artifacts every time I built to a separate Maven repository what a total waste. Right? And that's just, that kind of misconfiguration was costing us. We cut 20 plus terabytes off the download by just fixing those kind of relatively simple things. So that's part of the game, is be aware of what your users are doing, decide if it's valid, and persuade the ones that are doing dumb things to stop. Next.
Yeah, these stories are interesting, some things that you might not expect. When you start hearing stories about companies either blocking IPs or regulating like how much you can download. Remember when Docker put in their limits for how much you can download with a free account? We had so many people upset because their build servers just stopped, right? Because they couldn't download these things anymore. So then they realized, oh, well, maybe we ought to configure our build servers a little differently now to be better stewards of that kind of resource. All right, so let's talk about open source projects and things that you should consider. How do open source projects grow? And you must also think about the resources that your project has. So here's Jenkins resource, all right, or any open source project. I named this one Jenkins on purpose. And we're going to talk about all the things you need to consider.
So we may add new users to the open source project, right?
Yeah. And then new releases. New releases happen all the time. This is going to grow your storage if you're not doing that.
We may add more people reading our web pages.
All right, new service consumers.
New contributors to the project, we like those. They're great. What? Brett, you shocking thing. We love that. Keep going.
Let's throw in some more bug reports.
New dependencies. Oh, we've added a new feature. We got no more stuff to do. Okay, new dependencies.
How about search engine crawlers? That's going to add, some stuff.
And now we've got a really big pile. AI crawlers that ignore robots' text that don't give a rip about any attempts we take to defend ourselves, and they pile onto us. Oh,
Along with model training and all of that.
exactly. It is easy to see how projects can be overwhelmed by what happens to those projects, right? It's just the reality.
So what to do? This is your call to action. Administer the systems. Make sure that you plan for the increases that are coming. Do not wait for it to be a problem, because as you know with your closets at home, once it's a problem, it's big. It gets big, harder to deal with. And be mindful of those administrative efforts. You don't want to kill your one administrator and make sure they have no work-life balance because of all of the resources they have to manage.
So to tell that story, the Jenkins project, for instance, for years had a single infrastructure person, one. That was all we could handle. That was all we could allocate, and nearly destroyed that person. We now have 4. You know when you go from 1 to 4 that something was wrong when you were doing it with 1, right? There was a serious mistake happening when we were doing it with 1. Because if there's enough work for 4, you probably shouldn't have just been doing it with 1 previously.
Stop caching other people's stuff. This happens to me when I go yard sailing. I end up bringing more stuff into my house. Obviously, there's some caveats there. You need to just be mindful of what you're caching and make sure that it's necessary and makes sense for your project.
Yeah, there are some phenomenal blog posts about the concept of the tragedy of the commons. The danger that happens when a common good is, the use of a common good is maximized by individuals, and that maximization causes damage to the collective group as a whole. This tragedy of the commons, we see it in all sorts of places. Great Wikipedia article on what it means when we abuse a common good. And we're seeing it live right now, right? I read reports from the Fedora project, how they were being hammered so hard by AI crawlers that they had to do blocking. Just like the Jenkins project was hammered so hard that we had to block ranges of IP addresses rather than put up with them coming after us. It was just too expensive to allow the misuse of the common good that we were providing. Same story for Artifactory, same story for Sonatype and Maven Central, right? They have a common good, and if we're not careful, if we don't use it well and wisely, we can do enough harm to that thing to cause the common good to collapse.
And then stop caching your own stuff. Just like I learned with my team, that there's builds, versions you do not need to keep, or consider putting them, like I said before, in a cheaper storage location. And then most importantly of all, monitor this stuff.
Right. Keep an eye. Now it's a tough call. It is a difficult thing to say, oh, I have a tiny little group of people who are doing the work. And this tiny little group of people have to monitor all the things and enhance all the things and deliver all the things. Yeah, sorry. It's a tough compromise and a tough call. Make the call the best you can.
Cool. That's it.
Thank you. Questions?